She was 8 years old, lying in a hospital bed with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung, and the only name she would say, the only word that came out of her cracked lips in the dead of a Wisconsin winter, was the name of a biker she'd met exactly once, outside a hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon when the world wasn't paying attention. The nurses thought she was delirious. The attending physician wrote confused, likely trauma-induced in his notes, and moved on. But the social worker, a tired woman named Carol who had seen too much and slept too little, she pulled the crayon drawing from beneath the child's pillow and stared at it under the fluorescent light. A man on a motorcycle, a scar across one cheek rendered in brown crayon, 2 sandwiches, 1 in each hand, and underneath, in the unsteady handwriting of a second grader, the man who was nice. His name was Knox Ryder, and he had no idea a little girl was dying with his name on her lips. If you've never heard a story like this before, stay with me, because what happens next is going to change the way you look at the men in leather jackets who ride past you on the highway. Like this video, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to know where you are. Now let's go back to the beginning, before the hospital, before the snow, before everything broke open, and I'll show you exactly how a single act of kindness becomes the thing that saves a life. The sandwich had been nothing. That was the honest truth of it. Knox Ryder had been standing outside Hendrick's Hardware on a gray September afternoon, eating a gas station sub he'd picked up 2 miles back because he'd forgotten to eat since the previous night, and his stomach had finally stopped being polite about it. The parking lot smelled like motor oil and wet concrete. A front was moving in from the northwest. He could feel it in the old break in his collarbone, a dull ache that had become his personal weather forecaster over the past 11 years. He'd been in Hartwell for 3 days, hadn't intended to stay longer than 1. He noticed the girl because she was too still. Most kids her age moved constantly, fidgeting, spinning, narrating the world at high volume. This one was sitting on the curb at the edge of the parking lot with her knees pulled to her chest and her chin resting on top of them, watching traffic with the flat, unfocused look of someone who had learned to make themselves invisible. She wore a pink jacket that was too light for the weather and sneakers that had probably fit her the previous spring. Her hair needed brushing. There was a bruise along her left forearm that she kept turned inward, toward her body, which was either habit or instinct. Knox had seen both, in different places, in different lives, and neither one was an accident. He stood there for a moment, chewing, watching her watch nothing. He knew better than to approach strange children in parking lots. He was a large man with a scarred face and a reputation that preceded him by several zip codes in every direction. He wore a worn leather cut over a thermal shirt, had grease under his fingernails that wouldn't come out no matter how long he scrubbed, and rode a motorcycle with exhaust pipes loud enough to rattle windows. The world had a specific category for men who looked like him, and it was not someone you want near your child. But there was no one near this child. That was the thing. No parent on a phone. No guardian leaning against a car. No older sibling rolling their eyes from a few feet away. Just a small girl on a curb, alone in a parking lot, in weather that was sliding toward cold faster than her jacket could handle. Knox finished 1/2 of the sub, looked at the other half, looked at the girl. He walked over slowly, making noise with his boots so she could hear him coming, and stopped about 6 feet away. "You hungry?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark brown, careful, and approximately 40 years older than the rest of her face. She studied him the way a person studies a door. "They're not sure leads somewhere safe," weighing, measuring, running calculations behind a still expression. She didn't answer. He crouched down so he wasn't looming over her, set the other half of the sub on the curb between them, and stood back up. "I'm not going to finish it," he said. "Stomach's not what it used to be." That was a lie. His stomach was fine, but it was the kind of lie that let someone accept something without owing anything, and he'd learned the value of that particular category of untruth a long time ago. She looked at the sandwich, looked at him, looked at the sandwich again. Then she picked it up and ate it in approximately 45 seconds, which told him everything he needed to know about how long it had been since her last meal. He didn't say anything else, didn't ask questions, didn't push. He just stood there in the parking lot while she ate, watching the clouds thicken over the tree line to the northwest, feeling the ache in his collarbone deepen. When she finished, she folded the wrapper neatly, a small, precise gesture that seemed at odds with everything else about her situation, and set it beside her on the curb. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was barely above a murmur. Sure, he said. He went inside the hardware store, bought the fasteners and the half-inch drill bit he'd come for, and when he came back out, she was gone. He didn't think about her again. Not really. She was a sad detail in a town full of sad details. And Knox Ryder had learned years ago that he couldn't carry every sad detail, or he wouldn't be able to carry himself. He rode south that afternoon, slept in a motel outside Beloit, and was back in Harlow Creek, the small Wisconsin city where the Iron Revenants kept their main chapter house, by the following evening. He did not think about the girl with the careful eyes and the too-light jacket, not until 4:17 in the morning on the first real day of winter, when his phone rang. Knox was not a man who kept his phone on at night. He'd learned the hard way that nothing good came through a phone line in the dark hours. And in the decade and a half since he'd come back from the 2 tours of Iraq that had left their fingerprints on every corner of his personality, he'd developed an almost physical resistance to sudden sounds in the night. His nervous system still hadn't fully accepted that the world he lived in now was not the world he'd lived in then. But he'd been awake already. That happened sometimes. A door closing 2 floors down, a shift in the building settling, something wordless and sourceless that pulled him up out of whatever shallow sleep he'd managed and left him sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, listening to nothing. The phone rang. Unknown number. Wisconsin area code. He almost didn't answer. Ryder, he said. The voice on the other end was a woman's, low, exhausted, and carrying the particular flatness of someone who had been doing difficult things for a long time and had stopped expecting them to be easy. Mr. Ryder, my name is Carol Hines. I'm a caseworker with Walworth County Child Protective Services. I apologize for the hour. What happened? Not a question. He didn't know why it came out that way. Flat, certain, except that the tone in her voice had already told him the category of thing he was about to hear. A pause. The sound of papers shifting. There's a child at Mercy General in Hartwell, 8 years old, Ember Hale. She was brought in 6 hours ago by ambulance. 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung, contusions consistent with repeated blunt force trauma, and signs of prior healing fractures that were never treated medically. Another pause. She's been asking for you. Knox said nothing. We found a drawing under her pillow, Carol Hines continued. A man on a motorcycle. She told one of the nurses your name. We ran it, found a partial address, cross-referenced some other things. It took me a while to track down a number. She stopped. I understand this is unusual. I understand you may not. I don't know what your connection to this child is. I gave her half a sandwich, Knox said, in a parking lot, 3 months ago. I didn't know her name. The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. She remembered yours? Carol Hines said. Knox closed his eyes. The room was dark. Outside he could hear the wind moving through the bare trees along the street, a low and constant sound like something breathing. Who's her guardian? A man named Victor Grayson. He's the one who called the ambulance. A careful pause, the kind that holds something back. He says she fell down the stairs. Knox knew what that pause meant. He'd heard variations of it before, in different contexts, from different kinds of people who'd seen different kinds of damage, and learned to say the words without saying what the words actually meant. I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. Tab. Mercy General Hospital sat on the north edge of Hartwell like an apology. A squat, aging building that had been expanded twice in the 1980s in ways that didn't quite match. The older sections faced in pale brick gone gray with decades of Wisconsin weather. The newer wings clad in a beige stucco that had developed long water stains down its face. The parking lot was half empty at 5 in the morning. The emergency entrance threw yellow light onto the snow-dusted asphalt. Knox parked the bike and sat on it for a moment with the engine ticking down around him, his breath coming in clouds in the 20-degree air. He'd ridden in the cold before, had ridden in worse, but tonight the cold felt different. It had a quality to it that he couldn't name exactly, something that went beyond temperature, like the air itself was waiting. He went inside. Carol Hines met him in the corridor outside the pediatric ICU. A woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of face that had been pretty once and was now something better, specific, lived in, honest. She wore a lanyard with her ID and a coat that hadn't been warm enough for the walk from her car. And she looked at Knox the way people sometimes looked at him when they'd heard his name but hadn't prepared themselves for the reality of his size, his scar, the particular quality of stillness he carried like extra weight. She recovered quickly. He gave her credit for that. "Thank you for coming," she said. "How is she?" "Stable. They got the lung stabilized around midnight. She's sedated." Carol hugged the folder she was carrying against her chest. The attending physician filed a mandatory report. "That's standard. What isn't standard is—" She stopped herself, looked down the corridor in both directions, then back at him. "Victor Grayson has an attorney. He was here by 2 a.m. Knox said nothing. He watched her face. "The attorney had paperwork," Carol said. "Custody reaffirmation. Medical decision authority. He was trying to get them to release her records." She shook her head, a small, tight motion. "I've been doing this for 22 years. I've seen attorneys show up fast before. Not that fast." "What do you know about Grayson?" "He became her legal guardian 14 months ago. Before that, she was in the foster system, 2 placements in 3 years. Her parents are both deceased. Father in a car accident when she was 4, mother from an overdose when she was 6. Carol's voice didn't change its register when she said those things. She'd learned how to hold facts without letting them break her open every time she said them out loud. Knox recognized the technique. He used it himself. "Grayson is a real estate developer, has a house in Hartwell, a lake property, a commercial portfolio. On paper, he looks like a man doing a generous thing. And off paper?" Carol was quiet for a moment. "He has guardianship of 3 other children, all in similar situations, orphaned or abandoned, each with some kind of estate or trust fund attached to them. Ember's parents had a small life insurance policy, $50,000. Grayson controls it until she turns 18. She paused. "Or until she doesn't." The words landed in the corridor between them and didn't move. Knox looked at the door of the pediatric ICU. Through the narrow window in the door, he could see the blue-white light of monitoring equipment, the shapes of beds, the particular stillness of a room where people were being kept alive by machinery and will. "Can I see her?" "You're not family." "No," he said. Carol looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her folder, pulled out a visitor's badge, and handed it to him without a word. Ember Hale was small in the hospital bed in the way that children always look too small in hospital beds, the equipment around her scaled for adult proportions, making her seem diminished by comparison. She had an oxygen cannula, an IV line, a cardiac monitor whose soft, rhythmic beeping was the most reassuring sound Knox had heard in hours. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow. There was bruising along her jaw and down the left side of her neck, and her left arm was wrapped from wrist to elbow. She was asleep. "Sedated," Carol had said. Knox stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her and felt something move through his chest that he didn't have a clean name for. Not grief exactly. Not anger exactly, though the anger was there underneath like bedrock, solid, cold, going down a long way. It was something closer to recognition. The particular recognition that comes from seeing something you already knew existed finally made visible in front of you. He'd known children like this. He'd been adjacent to damage like this, in different forms, in different contexts. He'd seen what happened when nobody showed up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small sketchbook he sometimes carried, a habit he'd developed in the VA program years ago that had calcified into something private and stubborn. He tore a clean page from the back, found a pen in his breast pocket, and wrote 7 words on the paper in his uneven handwriting. "I'm here. You don't have to be scared." He folded it twice and set it on the tray table beside her bed, beneath the small hospital cup that held a plastic straw, so it would be the first thing she saw when she woke up. Then he went back out into the corridor. He called Dex at 5:40 in the morning, standing in the hospital parking lot, with snow beginning to fall in thin, wind-scattered flakes and the temperature dropping towards single digits. Dexter Vaughn, Dex to everyone who hadn't wanted a broken nose for using his first name, was the president of the Iron Revenants MC, Harlow Creek chapter. He was also the closest thing Knox had to a brother, which was a distinction that meant something specific and non-trivial in the particular language the two of them spoke. They'd served together in Fallujah. They'd buried people together. They'd rebuilt themselves in parallel and imperfect ways in the years since. and they had arrived at a friendship that didn't require much maintenance but would hold an extraordinary amount of weight when needed. The phone rang twice. "Who died?" Dex said. His voice was rough with sleep but immediately alert. That old soldier thing, the ability to go from zero to functional in the space of a breath. "Nobody yet," Knox said. "I need the table." A pause. "When?" "This morning, soon as you can get them." Another pause, longer. The sound of movement, feet on floor, a door. "This bad?" Knox looked up at this hospital building, at the pale rectangle of window that he'd marked as approximately the right wing, the right floor. "Yeah," he said. "It's bad." The Iron Revenant's clubhouse in Harlow Creek occupied the former body of a muffler shop on an industrial block 3 streets east of the rail yard, a squat, wide building of corrugated steel and old brick that had been purchased a decade ago for a price that reflected its fundamental ugliness and transformed by degrees into something that was, if not beautiful, at least honest. The garage bays still opened onto the street. The interior smelled permanently of motor oil, welding flux, and the particular brand of dark coffee that Hector kept in a 60-cup urn that had been running continuously for 6 years. The walls held photographs, maps, the occasional piece of metalwork someone had made in the shop during a winter they'd had too much time and not enough to do. Knox arrived at 7:15. There were already 9 bikes in the lot. They gathered around the long table in the back room, the room they called the war room, though it held no weapons, only a surface scarred by decades of coffee cups and elbows, and the occasional knife someone had been using on a sandwich and set down without thinking. The overhead light was a single industrial fixture that buzzed faintly and cast the room in a light that was honest about its own inadequacy. Dex sat at the head of the table. He was a large man, darker-skinned and broader through the shoulders than Knox, with a shaved head and a beard that was going gray at the chin and eyes that had seen enough to be permanently past surprise. He wore his cut over a Henley, which meant he'd gotten dressed in a hurry. He was drinking coffee and saying nothing, which meant he was thinking. Around the table, Hector Reyes, 42, former Army medic, currently the chapter's medical liaison and the closest thing any of them had to an in-house doctor when the in-house doctor couldn't be involved. Paulie Murch, 47, a wide, quiet man who had been a detective with Milwaukee PD for 11 years before the department had given him a choice he couldn't make, and he'd made the other one instead. Theo Briggs, 38, who everyone called Wrench because he'd once disassembled a car engine in 22 minutes on a bet, and because Theo sounded nothing like him. Cass Monroe, the lone woman at the table, 51 years old, a former public defender who had left private practice under circumstances she'd described exactly once to exactly one person in the room. Sal DiMartino, 60, who had been doing things in this world long enough to have opinions about most of them and the good grace to mostly keep them to himself until they were useful, and 3 others Knox knew less well, newer members, patched in within the last 2 years, who sat slightly back from the table in the unconscious posture of men who understood they were at the edge of someone else's conversation. Knox stood at the end of the table opposite Dex and told them everything Carol Hines had told him. He told it flatly, in sequence, the way he'd learned to brief in the military. Facts first, implications second, questions third. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the buzz of the overhead light and the distant sound of a train moving through the rail yard. Paulie was the first one to speak. "Grayson? Victor Grayson." He was turning the name over like something he was checking for weight. "Real estate, Hartwell. You know him?" "Not personally, but that name's been adjacent to some things." Paulie set down his coffee cup. "There was a case, 3 years back, maybe 4, civil suit, some kind of estate dispute. One of the other parties was a man named Grayson, first name V. The suit got dismissed on procedural grounds. I don't remember the details, but I remember the name because the attorney on the other side did something that made me—" He stopped. "I need to look at it." "Do that," Dex said. Hector leaned forward. 3 other kids under guardianship, similar profiles. "What's the trust situation on the other 3? "I don't know yet," Knox said. "Carol Hines might be able to get that." "She'll move slow," Cass said. "She's bound by procedure. If she moves too fast on a guy with an attorney on speed dial, she risks the case." She was holding a pen but hadn't written anything. We don't have those constraints. We also don't have subpoena power, Dex said. No, Cass agreed, but we have other things. It wasn't a threat. It was a description of a particular category of capability, and everyone at the table understood the distinction. Dex looked at Knox. What do you want from us? Knox had been standing with his hands flat on the table. He looked at Dex for a moment. That specific look that passed between them sometimes. The one that carried the weight of Fallujah and the weight of the years after, and the weight of every moment they'd arrived too late and every moment they'd arrived just in time. I want to know what Grayson actually is, Knox said. Not what's on paper, what's underneath it. And then we figure out what to do with what we find. Dex nodded once, the small decisive motion of a man who had already made the decision before the question finished being asked. Wrench, I need you to pull the financial public records. Anything filed, anything searchable. Hector, connect with the hospital. You know someone on the pediatric floor? Fletcher, she'll talk to me. Get whatever she can tell you without crossing a line she can't uncross. Polly, find that case. Dex looked around the table. Cass, I need you to start building a picture of the other 3 kids. Whatever you can get through legitimate channels first, then we see what else is necessary. He stood. Everyone move. What? The day unfolded in the particular way that days unfolded when the Iron Revenants put their attention on a problem. Not with the loud, dramatic momentum that the club's reputation might have suggested, but with a kind of methodical, distributed focus that was in some ways more unsettling. They worked phones, worked contacts, worked the kinds of relationships that accumulated over years of being the people who showed up for things that other organizations didn't show up for. They had a network that ran through half a dozen counties and crossed the lines between law enforcement and outside the law in the complicated, non-cartographical way that real networks always did. Knox drove back to Hartwell around noon. He found Carol Hines in the hospital cafeteria, eating a sandwich she didn't seem to be tasting, staring at a folder she'd stopped actually reading. She looked up when he sat down across from her without asking. You look like you've been awake for 30 hours, he said. 28, she said. Close. Tell me about the other 3 kids. She looked at him for a moment. I can't share case file information. I'm not asking for the files. I'm asking what you know. The distinction was thin enough to be mostly fictional, and they both understood that. But Carol Hines had been doing this for 22 years, and in 22 years you learned which fictions were useful and which ones weren't, and you learned that sometimes the right fiction was the one that let you do the thing you knew needed doing. She looked at her sandwich. There's a boy named Marcus, 11 years old. He's been in Grayson's custody for about 2 years. Before that, he was in the system. His father died in a workplace accident. There was a settlement that went into a trust, about $90,000. She paused. Marcus has been treated at 3 different urgent care facilities over the past 18 months. Different locations, shoulder, wrist, 2 separate visits for rib pain. She stopped. Different facilities? Knox said. So they don't pattern match in the same system, Carol said. Her voice was completely flat now. Yes. The other 2? A girl named Aisha, 9. Cerebral palsy, mild, functional, verbal, mobile. Her mother's estate included a disability trust. She folded her hands on the table. And a 7-year-old boy named Owen. He's the newest. He came into Grayson's custody 4 months ago after his grandmother, who was his only living relative, died of a stroke. The grandmother had a small estate. House was sold. Money went into a supervised trust. She looked at Knox. Grayson is the supervisor. The cafeteria around them was the ordinary lunchtime background noise of a hospital. Trays, conversation, the particular institutional smell of food cooked in bulk. Normal sounds, normal smells. The completely ordinary infrastructure through which something terrible was operating. Has anyone connected this before? Knox asked. I filed a concern report on Marcus 8 months ago, Carol said. It was reviewed. It was closed. The reviewer noted that the injuries were consistent with an active 11-year-old boy and that the multiple facility visits were explained by the family's frequent travel. She picked up her sandwich, looked at it, set it back down. The reviewer was a supervisor I'd never worked with before. He came from a different county office. I don't know how he got the case. Knox sat with that for a moment. Someone redirected it, he said. I don't know that. But you think it. Carol looked at him steadily. I think there are things I don't know yet, and I think knowing them matters. Yeah, Knox said. I think so too. Oh, by 4 in the afternoon, the snow had become serious. Not a winter storm serious, but a persistent heavy flurry that cut visibility on the highway and turned the world soft-edged and gray. Knox rode back to Harlow Creek with the wind coming at him from the northwest, the cold finding every gap in his gear, his fingers numb inside his gloves despite the heated grips. The ache in his collarbone had gone from dull to sharp. He was almost back to the clubhouse when Polly called. I found the case, Polly said. He was speaking quietly, which meant something. The civil suit from 3 years ago. It wasn't an estate dispute. It was a guardianship termination. A family was trying to remove Grayson as guardian of a child named Daniel Foss, 13 years old at the time, small trust. His parents had died in a house fire. What happened to the case? Dismissed. Procedural error on the filing. The family's attorney made a mistake with the jurisdiction paperwork, and by the time they refiled, they were past a statute. And here's the thing. Polly paused. Daniel Foss is not a name I can find anywhere after that. Not in any school enrollment record, not in any social service database, not in any medical system. A car passed Knox going the other direction, its headlights cutting yellow through the gray. He just disappears? He was 13 in year 1. He'd be 16 now, maybe 17. I can't find him. A pause. Knox, that family that tried to fight Grayson. The aunt and her husband, the ones who filed the petition. I called the aunt. She still lives in Racine. I told her I was a private investigator looking into some financial fraud. Another pause, longer. She cried. When I said Daniel's name, she cried, and she said, I don't know where he is and nobody will tell me. Knox pulled into the clubhouse lot and stopped the bike without turning off the engine. Pull everything you can on Grayson going back 10 years, he said. Property records, business filings, everything. And see if you can find out where Daniel Foss is. Already started, Polly said. There's one more thing. He stopped. Say it. The building that houses Grayson's main real estate office. It's in Hartwell. I was cross-referencing the address against the county assessor records, and I found that he also owns a property about 20 miles north of town, a hunting cabin, purchased 7 years ago, listed as recreational use. No utilities on file, which is interesting because the property tax payments have been current, and there's no reason to maintain tax payments on a property you're not using. Polly's voice was careful in the way of a man handling something that might break. And the property changed hands twice before Grayson bought it. Both previous owners were individuals with prior juvenile record expungements. I can't access the expunged records, but the pattern of ownership is... I hear you, Knox said. Yeah. Knox sat on the bike with the engine running under him and the snow falling around him and the gray early evening dark settling over the industrial block like something being pulled down. He thought about a cabin 20 miles north of Hartwell in the frozen Wisconsin woods. He thought about tax payments and no utilities. He thought about a 13-year-old boy who had disappeared 3 years ago and a 9-year-old girl named Aisha and an 11-year-old boy named Marcus and a 7-year-old named Owen. He thought about Ember Hale lying in a hospital bed, keeping his name in her mouth like a secret, like something she was holding on to because it was the only thing that felt solid. He killed the engine and went inside. The temperature dropped to 4 degrees overnight. The clubhouse stayed lit. People came and went through the side door that led from the garage, stamping snow off their boots, helping themselves to Hector's coffee, dropping into chairs or leaning against the wall or crouching over the table to look at whatever wrench had spread across it, property records, corporate filings, a hand-drawn timeline on butcher paper that was growing longer every hour. Sal had made calls to people who operated in the southern part of the state and had received information back through a channel that didn't have a formal name. The information was incomplete and could not be sourced or cited, but it pointed in a direction that was consistent with everything else they'd found. Grayson was not alone. That was the direction. He had relationships, transactional, carefully maintained relationships, with people who processed the kind of paperwork that could redirect a concern report, people who could redirect a jurisdiction, People who could, in certain circumstances, make the kinds of decisions that kept a particular name off a particular list. It's infrastructure, Cass said, standing at the wall where they'd pinned the documents. She was using a marker to draw connections between nodes on a rough organizational sketch she'd been building for 2 hours. It's not one man doing terrible things. It's a network designed to make one man's terrible things look like normal administrative process. He's not sloppy. He's insulated. How deep does it go? Dex asked. I don't know yet. Could be local, could be something bigger. She capped the marker. The concerning thing isn't the depth. The concerning thing is the length of time. If Daniel Foss was a victim 3 years ago and the pattern goes back further than that, Sal, you said the previous property owners. 7 years, Sal said, at least. Then we're potentially looking at multiple children over multiple years. Not all of them are going to have people looking for them. She said it quietly, and the room got quieter. Knox was standing by the window. The snow was still falling, lighter now, the kind of fine, dry powder that didn't stick so much as accumulate. The streetlights outside turned it orange. We need more than suspicion, Dex said. We need the cabin, Knox said without turning around. The room was quiet. That's private property, Dex said. His voice wasn't objecting. It was flagging a line that everyone in the room needed to know was there so they could make informed decisions about it. I know, Knox said. If we go in without authorization, I know. Anything we find is inadmissible. It can be used to destroy any legitimate case. I know. Knox turned from the window. I'm not talking about taking anything. I'm talking about knowing what's there, so we know what we're dealing with. He looked at Dex. And so we know how to point the people who do have authorization in the right direction. Dex held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked around the table, at Paulie, who had been a cop and knew exactly what this conversation was, and at Cass, who had been an attorney and knew the same, at Hector and Wrench and Sal and the others. We're not making this decision tonight, Dex said. We need more information first. Paulie, is there any way to access county records on that property without going near it? I can get the survey maps, check if there's any registered well or septic. That would tell us if it was set up for habitation, regardless of what the tax filing says. Do that. And the kids, Hector said. Marcus, Aisha, Owen, we need eyes on them, not intervention, just information about their current situation. I'll work on that, Cass said. I have a contact with a family law practice in Hartwell. I can reach out without flagging anything. Knox looked at the timeline on the butcher paper. 7 years of nodes and connections and question marks and names, most of them children, some of them with answer boxes that were empty. He thought about the cabin in the woods. He thought about the tax payments with no utilities. He thought about the fact that someone had redirected Carol Hines' concern report 8 months ago, and that the person who'd redirected it had appeared from nowhere and then gone back to nowhere, and that a man who was insulated didn't become insulated by accident. He picked up his coffee cup. It had gone cold. There's something else, he said. They looked at him. The attorney Grayson had at the hospital at 2 a.m, Knox said. He was there before Ember was even stabilized, before they knew whether she was going to make it. He set the cup down. Nobody calls an attorney at 1 a.m. for a child's accidental fall. You call an attorney at 1 a.m. because you're afraid of what the child is going to say when she wakes up. The room held that. She's going to wake up, Hector said quietly. Yeah, Knox said. She is. And when she does, Knox said, she's going to need someone in that hospital who isn't afraid of Grayson's attorney. He looked at Dex. I want to be there. You're not her family. No, but Carol Hines gave me a visitor badge, which means there's a piece of paper somewhere with my name on it, and right now I'm the only person whose name that child knows. He paused. That means something. Even if I can't define exactly what it means legally, it means something. Dex was quiet for a moment. Then, go in the morning, don't give them a reason to remove you, and Knox... He waited until Knox met his eyes. Don't do anything that burns the case. I won't. I mean it. Not because of the law, because of her. If we burn the case, Grayson walks, and she's still in his custody. Knox nodded. It was a slow, deliberate nod that meant he understood completely and had already thought about it and was carrying the weight of it and would continue to carry it. He left the clubhouse at 8 and rode through the empty, snow-covered streets back toward the motel he'd checked into the previous night. The temperature had dropped further. The bike's exhaust made two parallel clouds behind him that disappeared into the dark. He lay on the motel bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. He thought about a child who had drawn his face in crayon from memory months after a single encounter in a parking lot and kept the drawing under her pillow. He thought about what it meant that he was the face she'd chosen. He thought about the cabin in the woods. He thought about all the names on the butcher paper timeline that had no answer boxes, just question marks, just nothing. The particular nothing of a child that no one was looking for because there was no one left who knew to look. He did not sleep. At 3 a.m, his phone buzzed, a text from Polly. Survey records show a registered well and septic on that property. Permitted for year-round habitation. Installed 5 years ago, after Grayson purchased. Knox stared at the message. Also, Grayson's attorney filed a motion this evening requesting full medical authority over Ember Hale pending a guardianship review. Cass found it in the county court filing system. Hearing is set for 9 a.m. day after tomorrow. Knox sat up. He read the text twice. Then he called Dex. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was very still and very cold and very white, the kind of quiet that only came after snow, when sound traveled differently and everything looked like something that had been covered on purpose. Somewhere 20 miles north of Hartwell, in the frozen woods, a hunting cabin sat on a piece of land with a permitted well and a permitted septic system, fully capable of housing people year-round, registered for recreational use only, tax payments current. And in a hospital bed on the 3rd floor of Mercy General, a small girl with a punctured lung and broken ribs and a piece of folded paper on her tray table was still breathing, still fighting, her heartbeat steady and stubborn on the monitor beside her. She had not yet woken up, but she was going to. And when she did, she was going to find out that this time, this one time, the person she'd reached for was actually there. What she didn't know, and what Knox didn't know, and what Carol Hines didn't know. And what no one standing in the cold and the quiet of that Wisconsin winter night yet knew was what was going to be found when the iron revenants finally opened the door of that cabin. And whether, once they opened it, anything they knew about the scale of what Victor Grayson had built would be enough to prepare them for what was inside. Dex picked up on the second ring. That meant he hadn't been sleeping either. "Talk," Dex said. Knox read him both texts. He read them slowly, the way you read something when you want the other person to hear every word and not fill in the spaces with their own assumptions. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who hadn't heard, but the silence of someone who was running through implications the way you run through a building checking rooms, fast and methodical. "Medical authority," Dex said finally. "Day after tomorrow, 9 a.m. That's not a standard motion timeline." "No," Knox said. "It's not. He's got a judge." It wasn't a question. Knox didn't treat it like one. "That's what it looks like." Another silence. Outside the motel window, the parking lot was a flat white rectangle under the security light, every surface covered in the thin, dry snow that had fallen since midnight. Nothing moved. The cold had gotten into the room despite the heater working, a damp, persistent cold that lived in the baseboards and the corners. "The cabin," Dex said. "Yeah. I said we weren't making that decision tonight." "I know." "Knox." "I know, Dex." Knox stood up from the bed, moved to the window, looked out at the parking lot. "I'm not asking for a decision. I'm asking you to think about the timeline. If that motion goes through, if Grayson gets medical authority while Ember's still sedated, he controls her treatment. He controls what the doctors do and don't do. He controls whether she's moved." He stopped. "He controls whether she talks to anyone." The silence this time had a different texture. Heavier. 7 a.m., Dex said. "Be here." He was there at 6:50. The clubhouse was already loud. Not with voices, but with the sounds of people who'd been up all night doing things. The particular sounds of productive exhaustion, boots on concrete, tools being set down, the metallic compression of a staple gun fixing something to the wall. Wrench had added 3 feet to the butcher paper timeline. Sal was on the phone in the corner, his voice low and unhurried. The voice of a man who'd been having important conversations for so long that he'd learned to make them sound unimportant. Hector was eating a gas station burrito over the table and reading a printout simultaneously, getting grease on the corners of the pages without noticing. Cass was standing at the main table with Carol Hines. Knox stopped. Carol looked at him without surprise, which meant she'd been told he was coming, or she'd come here knowing she'd find him, or both. She had the same coat she'd been wearing at the hospital, same lanyard, same folder. But her face looked different from the previous night. Not more rested, nothing like that, but different in the way a face looks different when something has shifted in the decision-making behind it. "She's awake," Carol said. Knox felt something unlock in his chest that he hadn't known was locked. Since when? About an hour ago. Briefly. She was in and out, but she was coherent. She asked about the note. He looked at Carol. Carol looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had spent 22 years in a profession that required her to remain professionally detached from outcomes and had gotten increasingly bad at it as time went on. "She said thank you," Carol said, and then she asked if you were real. The room was doing its thing around them. The activity, the noise, the organized momentum of the revenants working a problem. But in the small radius around Knox and Carol, there was a stillness. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I told her yes." Carol opened her folder. "I also told her there were people working on her situation. I didn't specify what that meant." She pulled out a document, not a printout, a handwritten page, the kind of notes taken fast and in shorthand. She talked to me for about 4 minutes before she went back under. I want you to hear what she said. Knox pulled out a chair and sat down. Carol sat across from him. Around them the room kept moving, but in the way a river keeps moving around two people standing still in it, aware, accommodating. Carol looked at her notes. She said that she fell because she was pushed. She was very clear about that. She said Mr. Grayson pushed her at the top of the stairs because she'd been listening at a door. A pause. She said she heard a voice she didn't recognize, a man's voice. She said Mr. Grayson was angry and he said she needed to learn to stay where she was put. Knox's hands were flat on the table. She said this wasn't the first time. Carol's voice stayed steady. The steadiness cost her something. Knox could see it in the set of her jaw, the small, controlled effort of it. She said the last time was 2 months ago. She has a healed fracture on her right wrist that the x-rays from last night confirm. No medical record of treatment. She lowered the notes. She asked me one thing, at the end, before she went back to sleep. What? She asked if Marcus and Aisha and Owen were okay. The name hit the table between them like something dropped from a height. Knox looked at Cass. Cass had been listening, turned slightly away from them in the way of someone trying to give a private conversation its space while being 5 feet from it. She turned now. "She knows their names," Knox said. "She lives with them," Carol said. "Grayson runs what he calls a group household. He has all 4 children in the same property in Hartwell." She paused. "That's not illegal. Group guardianship arrangements exist. They're not common, but they're legal." Another pause. "What's not legal is what Ember described about the household management." "Tell me." Carol closed the folder. It was a deliberate gesture, the gesture of someone who had decided they were no longer going to pretend to be operating within a normal framework. She said the children are not allowed to contact anyone outside the household without Mr. Grayson's permission. She said their school assignments are done at home. He homeschools them, or someone he employs does. She said there's a man who comes sometimes, a different man from Mr. Grayson, who takes Marcus out in a car and brings him back. She said Marcus doesn't talk about where he goes. Knox said nothing. She said Owen cries at night and no one is allowed to go to him. Carol's voice didn't break. It was a testament to 22 years and the particular armor you built over 22 years, and whether that armor was actually armor or just scar tissue. And right now Knox couldn't tell the difference. She said Aisha knows how to make food because otherwise sometimes they don't eat. The room had gone quieter around them. The work was still happening, but it had pulled back from this table, this conversation, given it space without being asked. "The motion at 9 a.m. day after tomorrow," Knox said. Cass came fully to the table and sat. She had a legal pad covered in her handwriting. "I've been working on it since Polly texted. The motion was filed by an attorney named Ferris Dole. He's a family law practitioner in Hartwell, but he's had relationships with a firm out of Madison that handles high net worth estate cases. I found 6 other cases in the public record where Dole appeared as counsel for a guardian facing some kind of challenge or complaint. In 4 of those cases, the outcome was favorable to the guardian. In 2 of them, I can't find the outcome at all. The cases went dormant in the system, which means either they were settled quietly or someone let them expire. What judge is on the motion? Cass looked at her notes. Judge Alan Pryor, Walworth County Family Court. She set down her pen. Pryor's been on the family court bench for 9 years. Before that, he was in private practice. You want to know who he worked for? Knox waited. A firm called Caldwell and Associates, Hartwell office. She looked up. Caldwell and Associates has represented Victor Grayson in at least 3 commercial real estate transactions in the past 8 years. I found the filings in the county recorder's office. The room received this in silence. Dex had come to stand at the end of the table. Knox hadn't heard him approach, which meant he'd been there for a while. Carol, Dex said, and his voice was the voice he used when he was being careful. The voice that was steady because he was deliberately steadying it. You understand what you're sitting in the middle of? Carol looked at him. Yes. And you're still here. I filed a concern report 8 months ago, and it was redirected by a supervisor I'd never heard of to a review process that resulted in it being closed. She said it evenly, without heat, in the tone of a woman reciting facts she'd been sitting with for 8 months and had finally found a place to put down. A child I work with is in the ICU with a punctured lung. I've been doing this job for 22 years. Yes, I understand what I'm sitting in the middle of. She paused. I'm here because the things I can do through official channels are slower than what's happening to these children, and because I think you people can do things I can't. Dex held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Knox. The look didn't contain words. It didn't need to. The argument happened at 8:15. It was not the first tension that had moved through the Revenants since the previous morning. There had been smaller frictions, the kind that accumulated in a room of people running on no sleep, and too much coffee, and the particular stress of working a problem that kept getting worse the more they looked at it. But this was the first argument that had real edges to it, that drew blood. It started with Wrench. Wrench was a man who kept his opinions to himself until they became too large to contain, and when they became too large to contain, he said them the way he did everything else, without decoration. We don't know what we're doing here, he said. They were gathered in the back room. Knox was standing, Dex was sitting at the head of the table. The others were arranged in the positions they'd occupied most of the night, the particular territorial claims of exhausted people. Clarify, Dex said. We're building a case. Like we're investigators. Like we have some kind of standing. Wrench had his arms crossed and his jaw set. He was looking at Dex, not Knox, which was either respect or strategy. We don't have standing. We're a motorcycle club. When this blows up, and it's going to blow up, we're going to be the story. Not Grayson. Us. Bunch of bikers interfering with a legal guardianship proceeding. That's what the headline says. So your position is we do nothing, Knox said. Wrench looked at him, then. My position is we've been sitting here for 12 hours, and no one said out loud what the plan actually is. We're gathering information, and then what? We hand it to Carol? She already filed a report that got buried. We hand it to the feds on what basis? Suspicion and property survey records? He leaned forward. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying we're building towards something we can't finish, and we're going to end up in the middle of it with no way out. There are children in that house right now, Knox said. Tonight. Not a concept of children. Marcus and Aisha and Owen, specifically, tonight, in a house with a man who broke an 8-year-old's ribs. I know that. Then what are you actually saying? I'm saying... Wrench stopped. He uncrossed his arms and pressed his palms on the table, the physical equivalent of a reset. I'm saying some of us have been here before. We've charged into things with the best intentions and we've made them worse. Some of us have records. Some of us have histories that will be used to make us the story if this goes wrong. He looked around the table. I'm saying we should know what we're walking into before we walk all the way into it. The room was quiet. It was Sal who spoke next, and when Sal spoke in a room, the room listened. He was 60 years old and had seen things that had made his hair white before he was 50, and he had the particular authority of a man who had been through enough to be past the need to perform. He's not wrong, Sal said, but he's not right either. He looked at Wrench. The part you're wrong about is the idea that we have a choice about whether we're already in it. We're in it. Knox is in it, and Knox is ours, so we're in it. That's how this works. He paused. The part you're right about is the part about doing this smart, which is different from not doing it. Wrench was quiet for a moment, then he sat back down. Dex looked at Knox. He's right that we need to know what we're walking into, which means the cabin question comes back to the table. Knox had known it was coming back. He'd known it since the text at 3 a.m. Here's what I know, Knox said. Ember heard a voice she didn't recognize. A man at the house. Marcus gets taken out in a car by someone who isn't Grayson and comes back without explaining where he's been. A cabin 20 miles north with a year-round habitation system and no stated use. He stopped. Something is happening at that cabin. I don't need to know the legal theory. I need to know what's there. And if what's there is what we think it might be, Paulie said quietly from his corner, we need to find it in a way that doesn't destroy the ability of people with actual authority to act on it. Agreed, Knox said. So you're not suggesting we go in, Paulie said. It wasn't quite a statement. I'm suggesting, Knox said carefully, that someone goes and looks, from the outside, at a property that is visible from a public road because I checked, and County Road 14 runs within 200 yards of the property line. Looking at something from a public road is not trespassing. Paulie was quiet for a moment. He was doing the legal calculation, the old detective's calculation, the one that sorted what was actual law from what people assumed was law, the line between what would hold up and what wouldn't. No, he said finally, looking from a public road isn't trespassing. And if someone sees something from a public road that gives them probable cause to believe a crime is in progress, then that someone calls it into law enforcement, Paulie said, and ideally that someone is a person without a jacket that's going to make the call look like a setup. Knox looked at Carol. Carol looked back at him. She understood what he was asking. If I receive a tip from an anonymous source that leads me to go with law enforcement to observe something, she said slowly, and what I observe constitutes sufficient basis for emergency removal. That's a different process than a court motion, Cass said. Yes, Carol said. It is. Emergency removal doesn't require a judge's approval. It requires a caseworker's determination of immediate risk. She stopped. I've made that determination before. I've never been wrong. Can you make that determination based on what Ember told you this morning? Knox asked. I already did, Carol said. I filed the emergency paperwork at 6 a.m., but an emergency removal still requires a law enforcement escort, and the officer I need to make that call is a man named Deputy Reardon, who has been unavailable since 6:30 a.m. and whose dispatcher keeps telling me he's in the field. The room absorbed this. Someone's sitting on the call, Paulie said. That's my reading, Carol said. Knox looked at Dex. Dex looked at the table. He looked at it for a long moment with the expression of a man who had made difficult calculations in difficult places and understood exactly what the weight of a decision felt like before you made it, and after. Paulie, Dex said, County Road 14, you and Hector. Take a truck, not bikes. Bikes are memorable. He looked at Carol. You ride with them. You're a caseworker following up a tip, that's true. He looked at Knox. You stay here. Knox opened his mouth. Knox. Dex's voice was quiet and absolute. You're the one Grayson's attorney already knows about. Your name is on a visitor log at the hospital. If you show up near that cabin and this goes to court, his attorney puts you at every location and makes you the story. He held Knox's gaze. You stay here. Paulie and Hector are clean for this. Carol is the authority. You stay. Knox stood there with the argument in his chest and the full knowledge that Dex was right sitting on top of it like ballast. He stayed. They left at 9:15 in Hector's truck, a 10-year-old gray F250 with a cracked dashboard and a pine sol smell that Hector claimed was from a cleaning product and everyone else suspected was from something the cleaning product had been used to clean. Carol sat in the back. Paulie had a camera, a regular DSLR, the kind a real estate agent or surveyor might carry, and Hector drove with the particular unhurriedness of someone who was not in a hurry because being in a hurry would be the wrong thing. At the clubhouse, Knox poured his 5th coffee of the morning and stood at the window and waited. Wrench came and stood beside him after a while. They stood in silence, the specific silence of two people who had said difficult things to each other recently and were now in the process of determining whether the difficult things had damaged something or just tested it. "I wasn't saying do nothing," Wrench said eventually. "I know," Knox said. Wrench stopped. He had a habit of stopping mid-sentence when he got to the part that was actually hard to say, as though he needed a moment to verify that he actually wanted to say it. "I was in Kandahar when we went into a compound on bad intel. You know the one I mean." Knox knew the one he meant. "We were so sure," Wrench said. "We were absolutely certain. And we were wrong. And the people who paid for us being wrong weren't us." He looked at the window. "That's all I'm saying. Not do nothing, just be sure." "I'm sure," Knox said. "You're sure because of a little girl who drew your face in crayon." "Yeah," Knox said. "That's exactly why." Wrench was quiet. "That's not nothing," Knox said. "A kid who's been hurt bad enough to end up in an ICU, who still has enough trust left to draw a face she remembers from one afternoon. That's not nothing. That's the thing we don't get to walk away from." Wrench picked up his coffee. He didn't say anything else, but he stayed at the window. Polly called at 11:07. "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said, "and I need you to not react until I finish." Knox gripped the phone. Around him the room had stilled. Dex looked up from across the table. Sal set down his phone. Cass and the others went quiet in the collective way of people who'd heard a change in frequency. "We're on County Road 14, Polly said, "about 250 yards from the property line. Hector has the long lens." A pause. "The cabin is occupied." Knox waited. "There's a vehicle. Blue panel van, no exterior markings. Plates are obscured. Someone's put mud over them. Deliberate. There's smoke from the chimney." Another pause. "There's a padlock on the outside of the main door." Knox understood what a padlock on the outside of a door meant. Everyone in the room who was listening understood it. "Carol's on the phone with her supervisor now," Polly said. "She's trying to get the emergency removal escalated to state level, bypass the local bottleneck." His voice was steady but tight, in the way of someone keeping it steady through an act of discipline. "Hector's photographing everything he can see from the road. Knox, he got something through the window." A pause. "There's a—" Polly stopped. Knox could hear him breathing. "Polly, there's a mattress on the floor, and what looks like a child's shoe. One shoe, just sitting there near the window." He exhaled. "We can't verify who's in there. We can't see the whole interior. But Knox—" "Stay on the road," Knox said. His voice came out very level. "Do not cross the property line. Carol needs to make those calls." The van started moving. Knox's hand tightened on the phone. "What?" "Someone's inside. The engine just turned over. It's—" The sound of the phone moving, Polly's breathing changing. "It's turning around, back of the property. There must be another road. It's heading north, away from us." "Get the plates." "Plates are covered. I'm trying to get—" The sound of the camera, rapid clicks. "I might have the partial through the mud. Last 3 characters on the plate, maybe. Hector's trying." Knox was already looking at Dex. Dex was already on his feet. "Follow it," Knox said. "Knox, if we follow it, hang back. Don't let them see you. Just get a direction." He paused. "Polly, if there's a kid in that van—" "I know," Polly said. "Then get me a direction." The next 40 minutes were the longest 40 minutes Knox had spent since a different 40 minutes in a different country 11 years ago. He sat at the table and he did not move, and he listened to the updates come in through the phone on speaker. And around him the room was very quiet, in the way of people who were also holding very still. Polly and Hector followed the van north on a back road for 6 miles before it turned onto a county highway and accelerated. They stayed with it for another 3 miles before it became apparent that continuing to follow would mean being seen. Polly got a direction, north-northwest, toward the next county line. He got a partial plate. The letters appeared to be RK and a number that was either 4 or 9. And then he said something else. "There's a second vehicle at the cabin," he said. "Just appeared in the driveway. Black SUV. Someone came while we were following the van." A pause. "Carol's supervisor authorized the state escalation. There's a team coming, but it's going to be 90 minutes at minimum. Is anyone inside?" We can't tell from here. Carol. Carol's voice came through, slightly more distant. She'd handed Polly her phone. I have a name. My supervisor gave me a name. An investigator with the State Division, someone who's been working adjacent cases in 3 other counties. Her name is Agent Dana Marsh. She's the one coming with the team. A pause. Knox, she already knows Victor Grayson's name. The room was very still. She already knows, Knox said. She says she's been building a file for 14 months, Carol said. She says they were waiting for something evidentiary that could hold up. She said they've had, she used the word challenges, with the local infrastructure around Walworth County. A pause. She was very careful about how she said it. Knox thought about Judge Alan Pryor and his 9 years on the family court bench and the firm he'd worked for that had represented Victor Grayson in 3 real estate transactions. Challenges, Knox said. Yes. Tell her we have a partial plate on a blue panel van heading north-northwest out of the county as of 40 minutes ago. Tell her we have photographs of the cabin exterior, including a vehicle with obscured plates. Tell her we have a child in the ICU at Mercy General who gave a verbal account of abuse and asked specifically about the welfare of 3 other children currently in Grayson's custody. He stopped. And tell her there's a motion before Judge Pryor at 9 a.m. tomorrow that she needs to know about. A silence. Then Carol. I'll tell her. The state team arrived at the cabin at 12:52 in the afternoon. Polly and Hector were still on County Road 14. They described what they saw in short, factual texts that came in irregularly. Team of 4 agents plus county deputy, not Reardon, different one. Search warrant. Going in now. Then, cabin clear. No one inside. Then, after a pause that was long enough to have its own weight, they found something. Polly called instead of texting. There's a room, he said. His voice was different now. Not the careful steadiness of the preceding hours, but something stripped down beneath it, something raw that the steadiness had been keeping in place. Below the main floor, hatch under a rug, they found... He stopped. Records. Boxes of records. Files. Photographs. He stopped again. Marsh came outside after they opened the boxes. She was on her phone for about 2 minutes. When she came back in, she was... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Knox was standing in the middle of the clubhouse, and the room around him had gone completely silent. How far back? Knox asked. I don't know. I can't see into the room. But from what I could see when they were bringing boxes out... A breath. Knox, there are a lot of boxes. The afternoon light was coming through the clubhouse windows at a low angle, the thin February sun that gave light without heat, and it fell across the butcher paper timeline on the wall, across all the nodes and connections and question marks and empty answer boxes. And Knox stood in that light and understood something with a certainty that went all the way through him. This was not a man who had been doing terrible things to children in his custody. This was a system. A designed, maintained, deliberately obscured system that had been running for years and had swallowed up children and moved them through it, and left records of what it had done with them in a room beneath a trapdoor in a hunting cabin in the Wisconsin woods. And the reason those records existed was not because the people running it were careless, but because records were useful, because documentation was currency in certain transactions, because some of what was in those boxes was probably not evidence of crimes committed, but evidence of crimes ongoing and crimes planned. Knox sat down. He sat down in the nearest chair, and he pressed both hands flat on his thighs, and he breathed. Dex was beside him. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on Knox's shoulder, brief, heavy, there, and then took it away. Ember, Knox said. She's stable, Hector said through the phone. Fletcher texted me an hour ago. She's in and out, but she's stable. Knox nodded. He nodded slowly, the movement of a man deciding something rather than agreeing to something. Then his phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. The text said, Mr. Ryder, my name is Victor Grayson. I understand you've been visiting my ward at Mercy General Hospital. I'd like to discuss this matter privately. I think we can come to an understanding that benefits everyone, especially Ember. Knox read it twice. He looked at the text for a long moment. The room was quiet around him. The afternoon light came through the windows and fell on the butcher paper timeline and on the faces of the men and the woman who were sitting at the table waiting. Then he looked up at Dex. "He knows," Knox said. Dex looked at the phone. He read the text. His face didn't change in any dramatic way. There was no particular movement in his expression, no sharp reaction, just a settling, like rock under pressure, going denser. "He knows what we've been doing," Knox said, "or some of it, enough to try to negotiate." "Or enough to be scared," Cass said. "Scared men with money and judges are more dangerous than calm ones," Sal said. Dex handed the phone back to Knox. "Don't respond." "I know. I mean it. Not a word. Nothing he can screenshot, nothing he can—" "I know, Dex." Knox set the phone on the table, face down. "But this means we're out of time. If he's reaching out to me directly, he's either trying to buy us off or he's trying to identify exactly what we know so he can—" He stopped. "So he can move the other kids," Cass said. The room received that. Marcus, Aisha, Owen. 3 children in a house in Hartwell, with a man who had just sent a text that was either an olive branch or a threat dressed up as one. "Carol," Knox said. Polly had her back on the line. "I'm here." The 3 kids at the Hartwell house, Marcus, Aisha, Owen. "Can Marsh—" "I already asked," Carol said. "She's working on a second warrant. The cabin find gives her the basis." "But it takes time, Knox." "A warrant isn't—" "How much time?" A pause. "She said she could have it by tonight, maybe. If the judge she's going to—" Another pause. "If the judge cooperates." "Which judge?" "Not Pryor," Carol said. She said specifically not Pryor. She's going through federal channels. Knox looked at the face-down phone on the table. Federal channels. Tonight, maybe. Meanwhile, Victor Grayson had his phone number and a text window and whatever it was he was afraid of finding in those boxes under the trapdoor. "He knows what's in the room," Knox said quietly. Everyone looked at him. "He's not reaching out to negotiate because he thinks he can explain the boxes away," Knox said. "He's reaching out because the boxes are found, and he knows what's in them, and he's trying to figure out how much time he has." He looked at Dex. "He's going to run. Or he's going to do something to the kids before he runs. One or the other. Tonight." The room was very quiet. The afternoon light had moved, the sun dropping behind the building across the street, and the clubhouse went gray in the sudden shadow, and the buzzing fluorescent overhead light kicked on automatically the way it always did, yellow and honest and inadequate. Dex stood up. He stood up the way he stood up before things, the particular way that Knox had seen in 2 countries and across a decade and a half of after the war, not theatrical, not dramatic, just the physical fact of a man who had made a decision and was now its consequence. "Sal," Dex said, "get on the phone. I want every chapter within 100 miles that owes us a conversation to know that we might need bodies in Hartwell tonight. Not action, just presence. Just enough leather on the street that anyone thinking about moving children out of a house has to think about what they're moving them through." Sal was already reaching for his phone. "Polly," Dex said, "you and Hector stay on that road until Marsh's team is done with the cabin. Don't leave until they're done." "Copy." "Cass, I need you to draft something, a summary of everything we have. Every document, every cross-reference, every name. Something Marsh can use that came from us directly and is on the record. Doesn't matter if she already has it. I want us on record as having provided it." Cass was already writing. Dex looked at Knox last. "You're going to the hospital," Dex said. "You're going to sit outside that ICU. You're not going to respond to Grayson's text. And if his attorney shows up, you're going to be there, and he's going to know you're there, and he's going to know that you being there means something." He paused. "Can you do that without doing anything else?" Knox thought about the text on the face-down phone. He thought about the word understanding. He thought about the word especially Ember. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "I can do that," he said. He walked to the door. Then he stopped. He turned around and looked at the room, at Dex and Cass and Sal and Wrench and the others, at the butcher paper timeline on the wall, at the buzzing overhead light, at the mess of coffee cups and printouts, and the long night written into every surface. "Wrench," he said. Wrench looked at him. "The compound in Kandahar," Knox said. "Bad intel. You were right. We went in wrong." He paused. "This isn't that." Wrench held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through his face. Not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of a man who has accepted that the present is not the past, even when the past is the only map you have. Knox walked out into the cold. He was 15 minutes outside of Hartwell, on the highway, the Harley loud beneath him, and the cold driving into his face through his helmet visor, when his phone buzzed again in his breast pocket. He didn't stop. He didn't stop because stopping on the highway in 4-degree weather to read a text from a man who had broken a child's ribs and kept records of worse things in a box under a trap door was not something he was going to do. But he felt the buzz. And then he felt a second one. And then a third. 3 texts in the space of 2 minutes from a number he'd never asked for. He rode the remaining 15 minutes in the narrow corridor between knowing and not knowing, between the sounds of the engine and the cold in the road, the particular suspended tension of a thing that had already happened but hadn't been received yet. He pulled into the hospital parking lot and killed the engine and sat in the ticking silence and took out the phone. The first text. I think you'll want to reconsider your current activities, Mr. Ryder. There are things about Ember's situation that you don't fully understand. The second text. She's not what you think she is. None of them are. I've been protecting these children from people who would do them far greater harm. If you continue down this path, you will destroy the only thing standing between them and something much worse. The third text was not words. It was a photograph. It took Knox's eyes a moment to understand what they were looking at. The photograph was dim, taken in artificial light, and it showed a hallway or a corridor, institutional, bare-walled. And at the end of the hallway, partially in shadow, was a figure, small, seated on the floor with their back against the wall. The figure was wearing a green hoodie. Knox had seen a green hoodie in the list of Ember's personal belongings that Carol had compiled from the ambulance report. A green hoodie and a pair of jeans and the sneakers that were too small. But Ember was in the ICU. The figure in the photograph was not in the ICU. The figure in the photograph was Marcus. And the hallway Marcus was sitting in did not look like a house in Hartwell. It looked like the cabin. Knox stared at the photograph for a long time in the hospital parking lot, with the engine ticking down around him and the cold settling in and the hospital lights throwing yellow across the snow. Then he called Dex. He has Marcus, Knox said. He moved him before the warrant. He's at the cabin or somewhere near it, and he's using the boy to... Knox. He sent me a photograph, Marcus in a hallway. The warrant team was there, and they cleared it, but either there's another structure on the property, or he moved him through while they were documenting the room, and then... He stopped. He stopped because he was starting to lose the level quality in his voice, and the level quality was necessary, and he knew it. Knox, Dex said, listen to me. I'm listening. Call Marsh directly. Carol has her number. Call Marsh right now. Tell her what you just told me. Send her the photograph. His voice was steady, the voice Knox had followed in 2 countries. The voice that didn't pretend things were okay, but knew how to carry things that weren't okay without dropping them. Can you do that? Yes. And Knox, don't respond to him. I know you want to. Don't. Knox looked at the photograph, at the small figure in the green hoodie against the wall. 11 years old. His name was Marcus. He'd been taken out in a car by someone who wasn't Grayson. He'd come back without talking about where he'd been, and now Grayson was using him as a message. The cold was complete and absolute, the kind of cold that got into the body and stayed there, that changed the quality of thought and breath and decision. Knox sat in it with the photograph on his phone and the hospital lights on the snow and the knowledge, sudden and total, and with the specific weight of something that has been true for a while before you know it. That the thing about a point of no return is that you don't always know you've crossed it until you're already on the other side. Knox sent Marsh the photograph at 4:11 p.m. He did it sitting in the hospital parking lot with the engine cold around him and his fingers barely functional in the 4-degree air. Forwarding the image, and Carol's contact information, and a text that said, Grayson sent this. He has the boy. He knows your team was at the cabin. He's using the child as leverage against me personally. Call me. Then he sat there and waited. Marsh called back in 4 minutes. Her voice was not what he'd expected, not the measured bureaucratic tone of a federal investigator running a careful operation. It was tight, compressed. The voice of someone who had just had their timeline accelerated by a factor they hadn't planned for. "Where did this come from?" she said. "Direct text to my personal number." He introduced himself. He used his own name. "Yes." A breath. "That's either very stupid or very confident." "He has a judge on a motion at 9 a.m. tomorrow," Knox said. "I don't think he's stupid." "No," Marsh said. "He's not." A pause. Brief, functional, the pause of someone sorting information while talking. The cabin was clear when my team went in. We did a full sweep. If the boy was there, he was moved before we arrived, or there's a structure we didn't locate. "The property's 20 acres. Were you working off the survey?" A silence that answered the question. "There's a registered well on the eastern edge of the property," Knox said. "If there's a secondary structure, it would be near the water source." "How do you know where the well is?" "County survey records, public information." Another silence, longer, a different quality. The silence of a person recalibrating what they were dealing with. "Mr. Ryder, I need you to understand something. This operation has been 14 months in development. If it comes apart because there's an 11-year-old boy in a photograph that Victor Grayson sent to my phone as a threat," Knox said. "I understand your timeline. I'm telling you his." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'm sending my team back to the property," Marsh said. "Eastern perimeter. If there's a secondary structure, we'll find it." A pause. "I need you to not go near that property. I'm at the hospital. Stay there." She hung up. Knox sat in the parking lot for another minute. The cold had worked its way through his jacket and into his shoulders, the specific deep cold that lived in old injuries. The collarbone, the left knee, the 2 fingers on his right hand that had been broken and healed slightly wrong. His body's full inventory of prior damage, all speaking at once. He went inside. The pediatric ICU was quieter in the late afternoon than it had been in the pre-dawn hours. Different nurses, different rhythm, the day shift winding toward evening handoff. The woman at the desk recognized Knox from the morning. Carol had apparently called ahead, or the visitor badge in his pocket had done enough work, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had decided to stop asking questions about a situation they didn't fully understand. Ember was awake. He saw her through the window before he went in, sitting up slightly against the elevated pillow, the oxygen cannula still in place, but the IV stand rearranged, the cardiac monitor still doing its steady work beside her. She was looking at the ceiling with the particular focused non-focus of a child thinking about something specific. She turned when he pushed the door open. The look on her face was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated than relief, a kind of stunned verification, the expression of someone who had believed something and was now confronted with the evidence that they were right to believe it, and didn't quite know what to do with being right. Her eyes were very dark and very awake, and there was a bruise along her jaw that had deepened overnight to the color of old wood. Knox sat in the chair beside the bed. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You came back," Ember said. Her voice was rough from the cannula, from the sedation wearing off, from whatever the past week had done to her body, and the past, however, long had done to everything else. "Yeah," Knox said. "I thought maybe I made you up," she said. "After the parking lot. I thought maybe I remembered you wrong, and you weren't actually real." "I'm real," he said. She looked at him with those 40-year-old eyes in that 8-year-old face. "I know," she said. "I can tell the difference now. I couldn't always." Knox didn't ask what she meant by that. He let it sit. He understood that some things needed to be let sit, that pressing on them too early was like pressing on a new bruise. You got information, but you paid for it. "There are people trying to help you," he said. "People who are doing their jobs. It's going to take a little time, but it's happening." "Is Marcus okay?" The photograph on his phone, the green hoodie, the bare corridor wall. "People are looking for him right now," Knox said. "He's going to be okay." He said it with the full knowledge that he didn't know if it was true. He said it because she needed to hear it, and because making it true was the project, and because the alternative, telling an 8-year-old in a hospital bed that her friend was being used as a hostage by the man who'd put her here, was not something he was going to do. "He's the one who called the ambulance," Ember said. Knox went still. When Mr. Grayson..." She stopped. She looked at her hands on the blanket. Marcus called. From the bathroom. He locked himself in and called. He said if I didn't wake up, he was going to keep calling until someone came, and she paused. Mr. Grayson didn't know. He thought I called. The ambulance that Grayson had claimed to call himself. Marcus had called it. An 11-year-old had locked himself in a bathroom and called an ambulance for a girl with a punctured lung because there was no other adult in that house who was going to do it. Knox looked at the wall above Ember's bed and breathed through the thing moving in his chest. He's brave, Ember said, with the simple factual certainty of a child reporting an observed truth. Yeah, Knox said, he is. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out and looked at the screen. Dex. I have to take this, he said. I'll be right outside. Ember nodded. She was already looking at the ceiling again, back inside whatever she'd been thinking about. Knox stepped into the corridor and answered. Marsh found the secondary structure, Dex said without preamble. Storage building on the eastern edge of the property, padlocked from the outside, same as the cabin door. A pause. Marcus wasn't in it. Knox leaned against the corridor wall. The building had been used, Dex said. Recently. Bedding, food wrappers, a jacket. He paused. Child-sized. He was moved again. Between when Grayson sent you the photograph and when Marsh's team got back to the property. Yeah. Dex's voice was controlled in the way of someone who had decided to stay controlled because losing control served nothing. But Marsh found something in the secondary structure, taped under the bedding. A pause. A phone. Prepaid old model. It had been used to send one text message. Knox waited. To a number registered to a shell company, Dex said. Marsh ran the shell and it traces back through 3 layers to a man named Curtis Albright. He's a county commissioner, Walworth County. A pause. He's also on the board of a nonprofit called the Lakeview Children's Foundation, which has received charitable contributions from Victor Grayson's real estate holding company for the past 6 years. Knox said nothing. The text from the prepaid phone, Dex said, was sent 4 days ago. Before Ember was hospitalized, it said, package ready for transfer. Confirm window. The corridor was empty. The institutional lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarmed briefly and then stopped. Dex, Knox said, I know. This isn't just Grayson. No, Dex said, it's not. Albright, who else? We don't know yet. Marsh is running Albright now, but Knox... Dex stopped. When he continued, his voice had changed. Not louder, not more urgent, but stripped of something, a layer of professional steadiness gone, and what was underneath was the voice Knox had heard exactly twice before. Once in Fallujah and once 3 years after, at 2 a.m, in a different kind of crisis. Someone burned us. Knox's body went very still. What? Grayson knew we were coming before Polly and Hector reached County Road 14. The van at the cabin. It was already loading when they got there. It left before the warrant team arrived. That's not coincidence. That's advance notice. A breath. Someone in the chain between us and Marsh told Grayson that a team was going to the cabin. The corridor, the buzzing lights, the distant sound of a television in a patient room, voices too muffled to understand. Who knew? Knox said. On our end, everyone at the table this morning. And Carol. Not Carol. I'm not saying Carol. I'm running the list. On Marsh's end, her team, her supervisor, whoever her supervisor talked to when Carol called to escalate the emergency removal. A pause. And there's one more person. Knox waited. Deputy Reardon, Dex said. The one who was unavailable when Carol tried to get a law enforcement escort for the emergency removal. Marsh ran him this afternoon. He has a second property, a fishing cabin in the next county north. The property was purchased 3 years ago. The financing came through a loan from a private lender. A pause that had weight. The lender is one of Grayson's holding companies. Knox put his back flat against the wall. The picture was assembling itself in the way pictures assembled when you'd been looking at the pieces long enough. Not a sudden revelation, but a settling, everything finding its place. The shape becoming clear, not because new information had arrived, but because the existing information had finally organized itself into its true form. It was not a man. It had never been a man. It was a structure, A web of financial obligation and favors and quiet arrangements that held judges and deputies and county commissioners in specific positions, that redirected concern reports and buried civil suits and put the right name on a loan and the right signature on a motion, that had been operating for years behind the completely ordinary face of a real estate developer who gave to children's charities and drove a black SUV and called ambulances for the children he'd put in the ICU. "How many people are in this?" Knox said. "Marsh doesn't know yet. Albright's the first name outside Grayson's immediate circle. But if Albright's in it, there are others. Men at his level don't act alone. They act in groups because the group is the protection. Everyone's culpable. No one can turn without turning everyone, and that means no one turns." "Mutually assured destruction," Knox said. "Yeah." Knox looked at the door of Ember's room. Through the window he could see her silhouette against the pillow, the small, steady form of her. "Marcus is in the wind," Knox said. "Marsh has put out a description on the van, but the plates are covered, and—" "Grayson sent me that photograph specifically," Knox said. "Not Marsh, not Carol, me. He knows my name, he has my number. He knows I was at the hospital. He knows I'm the one who started this." He stopped. "Which means someone told him. Someone in our chain." A silence. "Knox, Oak. Someone at our table or in our extended reach told Grayson that Knox Ryder was the thread to pull. He said it flat and cold, the way you said things that you needed to hear out loud in order to fully accept. He sent me that photo because he thinks I'm the variable. He thinks if he has something I care about, don't. Dex, whatever you're thinking, don't." Dex's voice was sharp now, the sharpness of someone who knew the person they were talking to well enough to see the thought before it finished forming. "He wants you to move. He wants you to do something outside the operation so he can document it and use it. If you go near that cabin, near any of his properties, near Marcus—" "I'm not going near anything," Knox said. "I'm standing in a hospital corridor." A long silence. "Who knew about us?" Knox said. "In the chapter. Who knew before the table this morning?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, who knew that I went to the hospital last night? Who knew that I called you at 4 a.m.? Who knew before we sat down that I was involved?" The silence this time was different, slower. "I called Wrench," Dex said quietly, "before the others. He was already awake when I called. Said he'd been up." Knox said nothing. "That doesn't mean—" "No," Knox said. "It doesn't." He paused. "But someone was already awake at 4 in the morning, and someone told Grayson my name before I'd shown my face anywhere except the hospital, where the only record of my visit was a visitor badge that Carol gave me and a log at the nurse's station." "A hospital log is accessible to a county attorney," Dex said slowly. "Yeah," Knox said. "It is." Another silence. "Where's Wrench now?" Knox said. "He went out about an hour ago. Said he was getting food." "How long ago?" A pause. "An hour and a half, maybe." Knox looked at the ceiling. He looked at it the way you looked at things when you were trying to stay inside a rational process, and your body was pulling towards something that wasn't rational, the particular effort of a man holding himself in place. "I don't think it's Wrench," Knox said, "but you're not sure." "I'm not sure about anything right now except that the leak is real, and it's somewhere in the chain and we need to find it before Marsh does, because if Marsh finds it first, she shuts us out completely, and we lose whatever ability we have left to know what's happening to Marcus." Dex breathed. "Come back to the clubhouse." "I can't leave the hospital." "Knox, Ember asked me if Marcus was okay, and I told her he was going to be okay. I'm not leaving this building until I know if I was lying." He stopped. "I'll call you in an hour." He hung up. Swoop. He stood in the corridor for a long moment. His hands were at his sides, and he was very still. And he was doing the thing he'd learned in the military and failed to fully unlearn afterward. The thing where you divided your experience into what you could act on and what you could not. And you set the second category down somewhere internal, and you only carried the first. What he could act on, being present at the hospital. Being a documented, witnessed presence in a location that established his whereabouts. Not responding to Grayson. Calling Marsh. What he could not act on, the leak. Marcus's location. The van with the covered plates moving north-northwest through Wisconsin winter. He called Marsh. She answered on the third ring. Her voice had shifted again, more compressed. the timbre of a person managing multiple simultaneous crises and doing it with the precision of someone who had trained for exactly this, but had also hoped not to need the training today. "Ryder, I was about to call you." "Albright," he said, a pause. "How do you know that name?" "Same way I know about the well. Information that was findable by people who were motivated to find it." He paused. "How many more are there?" "I don't know yet." She said it without hedging, which he respected. "We're running the foundation board. We're running Albright's financial connections. We're running Pryor." She paused. "Pryor's the one that worries me most. He's sitting on a motion that gives Grayson medical authority over a child who is the most direct witness to at least 2 years of abuse. If that motion goes forward tomorrow, it won't. I can't stop it tonight. I need—" "File for a federal hold on the proceeding," Knox said. "You have enough. The cabin, the records, Albright, the prepaid phone, the connection to Grayson's financials. File for a federal stay on the state court proceeding, and Pryor can't move." A silence. "That's not how it—" "I know how it works," Knox said. "I know it's complicated, and I know it takes time, and I know there are procedural requirements. I'm telling you what the result needs to be by 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'm trusting you to figure out the path to that result." He paused. "You said you've been building this file for 14 months. Use it." The line was quiet for a long time. "The boy," she said. "Marcus. The van heading north-northwest. I need everything you have, every detail from your people on the road. You'll have it in 20 minutes. Polly will call you directly." "And Ryder?" Her voice changed. Not softer, but different, a layer of the operational compression dropping away briefly. "The photograph. The fact that he sent it to you directly. He's trying to isolate you, make you feel personally responsible in a way that makes you take action outside my operation." A pause. "He's done it before, with other people who got close." The words landed slowly. "Other people," Knox said. "There was a teacher," Marsh said. 2 years ago. A teacher at a school where one of the children had been briefly enrolled. She started asking questions. Grayson reached out to her personally. Same approach, personal communication, implication of threat toward a child, pressure to either back off or engage in a way that discredited her. A pause. She contacted her local police. They referred it to the county attorney. The county attorney at the time was connected to Grayson. The complaint was filed and went nowhere. The teacher moved away. I don't know where she is now. Another pause. He's strategic, Ryder. Personal contact with someone emotionally invested is a tool he uses. He knows that people who care about children make mistakes that people who don't care don't make. Knox stood in the corridor with that. What happened to the children she was trying to help, he asked. The silence was its own answer. I'll have Polly call you, Knox said. 20 minutes. He called Polly. He gave him Marsh's number and told him what was needed. Polly said 10 minutes, not 20. Then Knox went back into Ember's room. She'd fallen asleep again, the sedation still in her system, her body doing the slow work of healing, pulling her under whenever the vigilance relaxed. The cardiac monitor did its steady thing. The IV drip made its small, algorithmic sounds. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He looked at her sleeping face and the bruise on her jaw and the arm wrapped from wrist to elbow and the too light rise and fall of her chest with the punctured lung still knitting itself back together. And he thought about a teacher who had asked questions and a complaint that went nowhere, and children who had subsequently become something he didn't want to finish the thought about. He thought about Daniel Foss, 13 years old 3 years ago. No record anywhere after the guardianship petition failed. He thought about what was in the boxes under the trap door. Marsh had said records. Polly had said photographs. Neither of them had said what the records recorded or what the photographs showed, and Knox had not asked because some part of him had been managing what he let himself know in real time, rationing it, the way you rationed water in a place where you didn't know how far you had to go. He let himself know it now. He sat in the chair beside Ember's bed, and he let himself know what was probably in those boxes, and he breathed through it, the way he'd learned to breathe through things. Not out the other side, not past them, but with them, carrying them forward because they couldn't be set down. His phone buzzed. Dex, wrenches back. He went to get food. Has receipts. He's clean. Knox looked at the text. He felt something in his chest release. Not fully, not clean, but enough. Then who? he typed back. 3 dots appeared. Waited. Then, Marsh just called me directly. She says the leak was Reardon. He had access to the hospital visitor log through his county system credentials. He pulled your name at 5 a.m. and made a call on a personal cell to a number that belongs to Grayson's personal assistant. Knox read it twice. Reardon, the deputy who'd been unavailable. The one with the fishing cabin financed by Grayson's holding company. The one Carol had needed for the emergency removal escort and couldn't reach. He'd been unreachable because he'd been doing something else. He'd been making a phone call. Is Marsh moving on him? Knox typed. She is. But Knox? A pause. The 3 dots came and went twice before the next message arrived. Grayson's attorney filed an emergency amendment to the motion. It's not just medical authority now. He's filing for emergency relocation of Ember to a medical facility in Madison, out of Marsh's current jurisdiction, out of Walworth County entirely. Judge Pryor has been asked to rule tonight. Knox stood up from the chair. He stood up and his body went through a series of physical sensations in rapid succession. The cold in his injuries flaring, his heart rate spiking, and then deliberately leveled back down, his hands closing and opening once at his sides. Tonight. Pryor was being asked to rule tonight. Not 9 a.m. tonight. He looked at Ember sleeping. If Pryor ruled tonight, Grayson had medical authority and relocation rights before Marsh could get a federal stay in place, because federal stays required specific procedural steps. And those steps had minimum timeframes, and minimum timeframes could not accommodate tonight. He called Cass. She picked up immediately. I know, she said. I just got the filing alert. I've been watching the docket. Can we stop it? We can challenge the jurisdiction of an emergency motion filed without adequate notice, she said. She was talking fast, not panicked, but moving, the way Cass moved when she'd identified the leverage point and was working toward it. There's a procedural requirement that the opposing party receive notice before an emergency motion is ruled on. Ember has no legal advocate. She has no guardian ad litem. Technically, an emergency motion affecting her medical care cannot be ruled on without notifying. Who would be notified? CPS Carroll's office, formally. A pause. If Carroll files a formal objection to the motion in the next... She stopped. What time is it? 4:53. County Court Clerk's office closes at 5. The sound of her moving. Knox, I need Carroll to file a formal CPS objection to the motion before the clerk's office closes. If she gets it in, Pryor can't rule without acknowledging the objection, and acknowledging the objection tonight means a hearing, and a hearing means notice requirements, and notice requirements mean he can't do this in the next hour. Can she file remotely? She can if she has her credentials and a fax machine or a courthouse portal login. A pause. Does she have those with her? Knox called Carroll on the second line. She answered from what sounded like a car, the ambient road noise underneath her voice. I'm already heading back to Hartwell, she said before he said anything. Polly told me about the amended motion. Can you file a formal CPS objection before 5? A pause. Road noise. I have my portal login. I need a computer or a tablet with internet access. A pause. I'm 20 minutes from the hospital. Does the hospital have a business center? I'll find out. He went to the nurse's station at a pace that was not running but was the thing just before running and asked the nurse on duty, a compact woman with a close-cropped ponytail, whether the hospital had a guest business center or a public computer terminal. She looked at him for a beat. Administrative floor, second floor, you need staff access. I need staff access, Knox said. She looked at him for another beat. Then she reached under the desk and handed him a laminated visitor day pass with a magnetic stripe. Administrative floor, second floor, swipe at the elevator. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been a nurse long enough to know when something was happening and had decided which side of it she was on. The print station is to the right of the elevator. Knox looked at the pass, then at her. Thank you, he said. She's a good kid, the nurse said. The little one. She said it simply, without decoration, and turned back to her station. Carol arrived at 5:02. The clerk's office portal had a technical cutoff of 5, but an actual processing window of 5:07 due to server lag, a detail Carol knew from 11 years of filing reports at the end of the day, and knowing exactly how much time she actually had. She filed at 5:05. Knox stood beside her and watched the confirmation screen come up, the case number appearing in the filing queue, the timestamp 17:05:43. 43. Carol exhaled. It was a small, private sound, but it carried the weight of the entire afternoon. "Pryor can't rule tonight," she said. "No," Knox said. "But tomorrow morning is different." She logged out of the portal and closed the browser. Marsh needs to have that federal stay in place before the hearing. If she does, she will. He said it with more certainty than he had, which was what the moment required. Carol looked at him. She looked at him with the expression she'd been developing over the course of the day. Not quite trust, and not quite its absence, but something more complicated. The expression of a professional who had spent 22 years operating inside a system that had just demonstrated its own corruption to her face and was recalibrating in real time what tools she had left. "You're not leaving tonight, are you?" she said. "No. The hospital won't let you stay past visiting hours." "I know the nurse on the pediatric floor," Knox said. Carol looked at him. "Of course you do," she said, and it was not sarcastic. She left at 5:20. Knox rode the elevator back to the third floor and went back to the chair beside Ember's bed and sat down. Ember was still asleep. His phone buzzed one more time at 5:41. It was a number he didn't recognize, not Grayson's number, different. A 414 area code. Milwaukee. He answered, "Knox Ryder." Not a question. A man's voice, middle-aged, flat in a way that was either professional neutrality or the voice of someone who had suppressed their own reactions for so long, the suppression had become the default. "Who is this?" Knox said. "My name is Warren Albright," the voice said. "Curtis Albright is my brother." A pause. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, because I'm going to tell you something that changes everything you think you know about what Victor Grayson is. And after I tell you, you're going to understand why he sent you that photograph, and why Marcus is the one he used, and why that specific boy is the one he will never let go of without a fight that none of us are prepared for." Knox went still. "Marcus isn't a child he took in," Warren Albright said. "Marcus is a child he owns documentation on, specific documentation, the kind that doesn't just implicate Grayson, the kind that implicates people whose names you haven't found yet, people above Albright, above Pryor, above everyone in Walworth County." A pause. "Marcus witnessed something 2 years ago, and whatever he witnessed, Grayson has kept him close ever since. Not because he cares about the boy." His voice dropped in register, not from emotion, but from the weight of what he was about to say. "Because Marcus is the only living witness to something that would bring down people who make Victor Grayson look like a—" Knox didn't let Warren Albright finish the sentence. Not because he didn't want to hear it, but because his other phone was buzzing, and the number on it was Polly, and Polly only called when something was moving. "Hold," Knox said to Warren. He switched lines. "Talk." "The van," Polly said. His breath was short, the short breath of a man who'd been running or close to it. "Marsh's people found it, abandoned on a county road 12 miles north of the cabin, engine still warm when they got there." A pause, tight and fast. Marcus wasn't in it. But Knox. There was a second set of tire tracks, something smaller, a TV maybe, or a side-by-side, heading into the tree line. Knox was already standing. "How long ago was the van abandoned?" "Estimate puts it at 2 hours, maybe less. They transferred him into something that can go off-road." Polly's voice dropped. "They're moving him through the woods." Knox switched back to Warren Albright. "The people above Grayson," he said, "are any of them local? Right now? Tonight? In Walworth County or north of it?" A pause. "There's a man named Harlan Voss. He's not someone whose name appears in public records. He doesn't have a title. But when things need to move in this part of the state, he's the one who makes them move." Another pause. "He has a property, 40 miles north of Hartwell, off the grid, private access road. Grayson uses it when he needs to make things disappear quietly." Address. "I don't have an address. I have a county parcel number. My brother mentioned it once, 3 years ago, when he thought I was part of this." Warren's voice cracked slightly on the last word, a small fracture in the flat professional surface. He stopped talking to me when he figured out I wasn't. Give me the parcel number. Warren gave it. Knox memorized it in the way he'd memorized grid coordinates in a different life. Immediate, complete, filed in the part of his mind that didn't lose things. Why are you calling me? Knox said. A silence. Because my brother is going to prison, Warren said, and the people above him are going to try to make sure he's the end of the chain, and there's a boy out there tonight who is the only reason that can't happen. His voice was quiet now, stripped of everything except the fact underneath it. And because I've been sitting on this for 3 years, and I'm done sitting. Knox hung up. He was in the corridor in 4 steps and calling Dex while moving. Dex answered before the first ring finished. I already heard, Dex said. Polly called the clubhouse. We're moving. Parcel number. Knox read it. Run it to a physical location. Hector has the county survey access. On it. Knox, but Dex's voice shifted. We've got company. What kind? The good kind. A pause that carried something in it. Something that, even through the phone, even through the exhaustion and the cold and the accumulated weight of the past 36 hours, carried heat. Sal made his calls. Chapters started rolling in an hour ago. I've got 43 bikes in the lot and more coming up the highway. Some of these men I haven't seen in 4 years. Knox stopped walking. 43 bikes. More coming. Men who had heard a single sentence, there's a child, and gotten on their motorcycles in February in Wisconsin without being asked twice. Tell them to be ready to move north, Knox said. But Dex, no one moves until Marsh has the location confirmed and is moving with us. This has to be done right. I know how to do this, Dex said. It was not irritated. It was simply true. Knox went back into Ember's room. She was awake. She'd heard his boots in the corridor, or the change in the room's atmosphere, or the particular quality of hurried stillness that people carry when they're managing an emergency and trying not to show it. Her eyes found him immediately. Something happened, she said. People are going to get Marcus, Knox said. He said it directly, the way you talk to a child who had already survived enough to deserve directness. Right now, tonight. Ember looked at him. The bruise along her jaw had gone darker in the fading light. The cardiac monitor kept its steady rhythm. Her hands moved slightly on the blanket, not reaching for him, not grasping, just moving, the small, involuntary motion of a body registering something too large for stillness. He'll be scared, she said. Yeah, Knox said. But he called an ambulance from a bathroom. He can handle scared. Something moved across her face. Not a smile, but the thing adjacent to a smile in a person who'd forgotten the full range of what their face could do. You have to go, she said. It wasn't a question. The nurse knows I was here, Knox said. Carol knows I was here. You know I was here. He looked at her. I'm coming back. She held his gaze for a moment with those ancient, careful eyes. Okay, she said. Small and absolute. He went. The parking lot hit him like a wall. Not cold this time, but sound. The collective bass rumble of 40-odd Harleys idling in the dark. A sound that bypassed thought entirely and went straight to the chest. A vibration that the body received as something between threat and shelter. The lot had been nearly empty when he arrived that morning. Now it was a sea of headlights and leather and exhaust smoke, catching the orange glow of the parking lot lamps. And the men on the bikes were not loud, were not performing, were sitting in the particular stillness of people who had already decided and were waiting for direction. Knox found Dex at the edge of the lot. Location confirmed, Dex said. He had a hand-drawn sketch. Not a map, just a rough orientation, the kind you made when GPS wasn't the point and understanding the ground was. 41 miles north, private road branches off County 7. Property is fenced, but the fence line has a gate. Marcia's team is approaching from the north on a Forest Service road. She wants us on County 7, holding at the gate. Not going in, holding. Blocking outbound vehicle access while her team goes in from the north. She's using us as a perimeter. She's using us as the reason no one drives out of there with a child in a vehicle. Dex folded the sketch. She was very precise about what she's asking for. We stay on the public road. We block exit. We do not enter the property. And if someone tries to exit anyway, Dex looked at him. Then 43 motorcycles are on a public road, and a vehicle trying to leave will have to decide how much it wants to. Knox looked out at the lot, at the men sitting on their bikes in the February dark, exhaust smoke rising in columns into the black sky. Some of them he knew, had known for years, had ridden with, had sat at tables with in different clubhouses in different cities. Some of them he'd never met. They had come because a phone call went out, and the phone call said child, and they had come. "Let's move," Knox said. 43 motorcycles on a Wisconsin highway at night in February was not a subtle thing. It was a column of sound and light that pushed through the dark for 3 miles, the Harleys running in loose formation, headlights cutting white channels through the black, exhaust smoke trailing behind in the cold air like the wake of something enormous moving through water. Knox rode point with Dex beside him, and the column stretched behind them, and the cold was absolute and the road was clear, and the 41 miles went under the wheels in a focused, purposeful silence broken only by engines. Marsh's team was already at the north end when they reached County 7. Knox could see the distant sweep of federal vehicle lights through the tree line, tactical white, not the red and blue of local law enforcement. Moving, going in. Dex put up his hand and the column slowed and stopped. The gate was 100 yards ahead. Private property sign. The access road beyond it running straight into the tree line and disappearing. Knox killed his engine. One by one down the column, engines cut. The sound died in stages, and then the last one went, and the night was suddenly and completely silent, except for the wind moving through the bare trees and the distant sound of Marsh's team somewhere in the dark to the north. 43 men, sitting still on their machines in the middle of a Wisconsin county road in February, headlights throwing long yellow lines toward a gate they were not going to cross. Waiting. 7 minutes passed. Knox counted them against his heartbeat. Then the radio on Dex's handlebars, a simple CB unit, old tech, reliable, crackled. Marsh's voice. Clipped. Operational. "We have the boy. He's ambulatory. He's okay." A pause. "We have Voss in custody. We have 2 others. Another pause. "Grayson is not on the property." Knox gripped his handlebars. "Grayson is not on the property," he said into the CB. "Negative. His vehicle was here. He left recently, within the last 30 minutes based on engine temp." A pause that carried weight. "Ryder, he's heading south, back toward Hartwell." Knox and Dex looked at each other in the dark. Hartwell. Mercy General Hospital. 3rd floor. Pediatric ICU. A small girl with a punctured lung and a bruise along her jaw who had just watched Knox walk out the door 40 minutes ago. Knox's engine fired before the thought finished. Dex was a half-second behind him, and the column behind Dex began firing in a chain reaction, the sound building back from silence to thunder in the space of 4 seconds. And then Knox was moving south on County 7 at a speed that the road did not technically invite, and the cold air hit him like a fist, and he rode toward it. His phone was in his breast pocket, and it was buzzing, and he couldn't answer it, and he didn't need to because he already knew what it was going to say, and the knowing was in his body now, a cold certainty that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with the simple arithmetic of a man with nothing left to lose and a witness he couldn't afford. He came through the hospital entrance at a speed that was not running, but was everything before running, his boots loud on the polished floor, the cold still coming off his jacket in waves, and the security guard at the front desk stood up and Knox held up one hand. Not aggressive, just the flat palm of a man communicating, "I know where I'm going and you cannot stop me," and kept moving toward the elevator. His phone had been buzzing for the last 12 miles of highway. He answered it now, in the elevator, as the doors closed. It was the nurse, the one with the close-cropped ponytail who had given him the administrative day pass. "He's here," she said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, the steadiness of a person who had decided not to panic because panic was not useful. He came in through the side entrance. He told the desk he was the guardian. He has paperwork. "Don't let him in that room," Knox said. "I'm standing in front of the door," she said. The elevator opened on the 3rd floor, and Knox moved down the corridor at the same controlled speed and turned the corner and saw it. The nurse, whose name he still didn't know, standing in front of the ICU door with her arms loose at her sides and her face completely neutral. and Victor Grayson standing 6 feet from her with a folder in his hand and a man in a suit beside him who was clearly the attorney, and behind them both a hospital administrator who looked like a man who had been pulled from a late dinner and deeply regretted the timing. Grayson turned when Knox's boots hit the floor. He was not what Knox had pictured. He was shorter than expected, medium height, well-dressed, a face that was neither threatening nor kind, the face of a man who had been successful in rooms where success required a face that didn't alarm people. He was in his mid-50s and his hair was silver at the temples, and he held the folder the way a man held something he believed was a weapon. For a moment, no one moved. Then Grayson said, with the measured control of a man who had rehearsed this, "Mr. Ryder, I'm here to arrange a transfer of care for my ward. This is a legal proceeding, and you have no standing here." Knox looked at him. He looked at him for a long time without speaking, and what passed through Knox's face in those seconds was not rage. It was something quieter and more complete than rage. The expression of a man who had ridden 40 miles in February dark with the full weight of what this person was and had spent that 40 miles deciding what he was going to do when he got here, and had made the decision and was now simply its consequence. "Voss is in federal custody," Knox said. "Your vehicle was identified at his property. Marsh's team has been at your cabin since this afternoon." He paused. "Warren Albright called me 2 hours ago." The color left Grayson's face in stages, like water draining. "Marcus is safe," Knox said. Grayson's hand tightened on the folder. His attorney put a hand on his arm and Grayson shook it off. A small convulsive motion, the motion of a man whose rehearsed control was meeting something it hadn't rehearsed for. "You have no—" "Voss told them everything," Knox said. It was a calculated lie. He didn't know what Voss had said or not said in the 40 minutes since his arrest. But Grayson didn't know that, and the lie served the specific purpose of watching what collapsed in Grayson's face when he heard it, which would tell Knox what was true. What collapsed was total. It was not dramatic. There was no outburst. Grayson's face simply went through a sequence of very small failures, a tightening around the eyes, a movement at the jaw, the folder shifting in his grip. And each small failure was a door swinging open onto something that had been locked behind it for a long time. And what was behind it was not evil in any spectacular cinematic sense, but something much more ordinary and much harder to look at. It was fear. And it was the specific fear of a man who had built an entire architecture around never being found, and had just learned that the architecture was gone. The attorney leaned close and said something quietly. Grayson didn't respond. The hospital administrator cleared his throat. "Mr. Grayson, perhaps we should—" The elevator at the end of the corridor opened. Marsh walked out with 2 federal agents and a Walworth County deputy who was not Reardon. Grayson looked at the elevator, looked at Knox, looked at the elevator. "Victor Grayson," Marsh said, walking toward him with the specific unhurried pace of a person who no longer needed to hurry. "You're under federal arrest." The attorney stepped forward with his hands up in the universal attorney gesture of, "We can discuss this," and one of the agents stepped smoothly around him in a way that made clear the discussion had concluded. Grayson did not fight. He did not run. He stood with his arms at his sides while the agent behind him secured his wrists, and he looked at the floor, and the folder slid from his fingers and hit the polished hospital floor, and the papers inside it spread across the linoleum. The paperwork, the motion, the legal architecture he'd spent the night building to move one small girl out of a hospital and into a system that would protect him instead of her. The nurse with the close-cropped ponytail looked down at the papers on the floor and then stepped deliberately over them and opened the door to the ICU and went back inside to her patient. They sat in the parking lot for a long time after. Not all of them. Most of the chapter had ridden back to Harlow Creek once Marsh confirmed Grayson's arrest, the column breaking apart in stages on the county highway, bikes peeling off toward different cities and different states in the way of men who had come when they were needed and now went back to their lives without requiring anything for it. That was the nature of this. You came, you stood, you went. But Dex was there, and Hector, and Polly, and Cass, and Wrench. The core of it. The people who had been awake for 36 hours in a drafty clubhouse building something out of coffee and stubbornness, and the specific moral clarity that only appeared in people who had been broken down to their components and reassembled, knowing exactly which pieces they were. Knox sat on the Harley with the engine off. The cold was still complete, but he'd stopped feeling it the way he'd been feeling it. At some point in the night, his body had renegotiated its relationship with the temperature and arrived at something like an accommodation. Wrench came and stood beside the bike. He didn't say anything. He stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, his breath coming in slow clouds. "Kandahar," Knox said finally. "Yeah," Wrench said. "This wasn't that." Wrench was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He looked at the hospital building. "You were right about her, from the parking lot." He paused. "That matters. That you were right about her from one afternoon in a parking lot." Knox didn't answer. He was looking at a point somewhere in the middle distance, the specific nowhere that you looked at when you were processing something that was too large and too various to hold all at once. "Reardon's in custody," Polly said, from where he was leaning against Hector's truck. "Marsh confirmed it an hour ago. He flipped immediately. Gave her 4 names above Albright." He paused. Pryor was one of them. "And the kids," Cass said. It was not a question about information. It was the only question that had actually mattered since 4 in the morning the previous day. "Emergency placement," Carol said. She'd arrived 20 minutes after Grayson's arrest and was sitting on the tailgate of Hector's truck with a coffee that had gone cold. "All 3. Marcus, Aisha, Owen. Emergency foster placement tonight. Separate families, all vetted. It's not permanent. It's the first step." She wrapped both hands around the cold cup. "But they're out of the house." The parking lot was quiet. The hospital hummed its institutional hum, its lights throwing yellow across the snow-edged asphalt. "Daniel Foss," Knox said. Carol looked at him. She'd been expecting this. "Marsh has a lead, a placement facility in Minnesota from 3 years ago under a different name. She thinks it's him." A pause. "She's moving on it tomorrow." Knox nodded slowly. He thought about the boxes in the room under the trapdoor. He thought about what was in them. Not specifically. Not the way he'd been managing not to think about it specifically, but in its general and actual weight. He thought about years of documentation existing because documentation was currency, and about the system that had required that currency, and about all the places that system touched that Marsh was only beginning to map. It would take a long time. He understood that. It would take a long time, and it would be ugly, and it would not be clean, and some people would find ways to avoid what they deserved, and some children's records would hit dead ends, and some of the boxes would contain things that couldn't be undone. He understood all of that. He also understood that the boxes were found, that Marcus was in a warm building right now with federal agents and a caseworker and food. That Ember was in a hospital bed 30 feet above his head, breathing, healing, with a nurse standing between her and the world. That Grayson's paperwork was scattered across a hospital floor and Grayson's hands were in federal restraints, and the architecture he'd spent years building had come apart in a single night. That wasn't everything, but it wasn't nothing. It was, in fact, the whole distance between those two things. Borsimt. He went up to see her one more time before the sun came up. The night nurse, not the one with the ponytail, a different one. A man in his 40s with a quiet face, looked at Knox's badge and looked at Knox and nodded him through without a word. Ember was asleep. Deeply this time, the real sleep of a body that had been given the information it needed. You're safe. The machines are working. The night is holding. And had finally surrendered to it. Her breathing was even. The bruising on her jaw had begun, very slightly, to move through its colors toward resolution. Knox stood at the foot of her bed. He stood there for a long time in the blue-white quiet of the ICU, listening to the monitor and the soft mechanical sounds of the equipment and the distant low hum of the hospital around them, all of it doing the work of keeping her here, in this world, in this future. He thought about a September afternoon in a parking lot, a gray sky, a sandwich, a small girl with careful eyes who was too still. He thought about a crayon drawing kept under a pillow. He thought about the kind of trust that survived what hers had survived. The specific, extraordinary, battered, and undefeated trust of a child who had been given every reason not to trust and had done it anyway, had held on to a face remembered from a single afternoon and said, "That one? I think that one is safe," and had been right, and had kept being right even in a hospital bed with machines keeping her alive. He thought about what it cost to be that child, and what it meant that she'd spent that cost. He reached into his jacket pocket. He found the pen, and the small sketchbook. He tore out a page and wrote on it, the same uneven handwriting, 7 words. Marcus is safe. You were right about him. He folded it and set it on the tray table beside the first note, which was still there, slightly crumpled now, the fold lines soft from being opened and refolded. Then he left. Doug. The diner on Route 12 was the kind of place that existed specifically for the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning. A long counter, cracked vinyl stools, a coffee urn that had been running since the Carter administration, fluorescent lights that had given up on ambition and now simply provided visibility. It smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee and something that might have been hash browns in a previous life. They took up most of the counter and 2 of the booths. Nobody said much. They drank coffee and Hector ate 2 plates of eggs, and Polly stared at the laminated menu without reading it, and Cass made notes on a legal pad in her handwriting that got looser as the exhaustion took hold. Dex sat beside Knox at the counter, and they drank coffee and watched the cook move behind the grill in the unhurried way of a man who had been doing the same movements for 30 years and had found peace in the repetition. What happens to them? Knox said. Long term. Process, Dex said. It takes a long time and it's not clean and some of it will be hard. He paused. But they have Carol, and they have Marsh, and the people they were afraid of are going to jail. He drank his coffee. That's a different world than the one they woke up in yesterday. Knox turned the coffee cup in his hands. She drew my face, he said. It was not for Dex's benefit. It was something he was saying out loud because it needed to be said out loud in order to be real. From memory, from one afternoon. Yeah, Dex said. I gave her half a sandwich. Knox. I know. He paused. I know that's not why. I know it wasn't the sandwich. I know it was just... He stopped. I was there. That's all it was. I was there and I didn't look past her. Dex was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner window, the sky was beginning to do the thing it did in February at 5:30 in the morning. Not lightning exactly, not yet, but the darkness becoming a different quality of darkness, the first suggestion that something was on the other side of it. That's enough, Dex said. That's the whole job, being there and not looking past. Knox looked at his coffee. Around them, the diner held its small warmth against the Wisconsin winter. The counter, the coffee, the tired men who had ridden through the dark and come out the other side of it, the cook moving behind the grill, the fluorescent light doing its honest, unglamorous work. Outside, the bikes stood in a row in the parking lot, cold and patient. Somewhere north of them, in an emergency placement that smelled like a stranger's house and felt like uncertainty, Marcus was sleeping. Somewhere east, Aisha and Owen were in their own new uncertainties. And in a hospital on the north side of Hartwell, a small girl with a healing lung and 2 folded notes on her tray table was sleeping the real sleep, the safe sleep, the sleep that meant tomorrow was still possible. Knox finished his coffee. He set the cup down on the counter and looked at the empty cup for a moment, the way you looked at something ordinary after an extraordinary night, with the specific gratitude of a person who had been reminded that ordinary things existed and would continue to exist. Then Dex put some money on the counter and stood up, and Knox stood up beside him, and they walked out into the cold together, into the gray pre-dawn, into the row of waiting bikes, into the last of the dark before the light. The engines fired one by one, and they rode.